Over the course of a couple of years, today's artist wrote over 100 songs for one album. He somehow whittled it down to just 12 songs for that album, one that was more commercial than he'd ever wanted to create. He was exhausted. He was ready to move on. He was done with the album. Only his manager said it just wasn't enough. He told this artist he needed one blockbuster hit. Pissed off, this artist said, "Hell no, if you want another song, you write it." But eventually, he went back to his hotel. He wrote the most commercially accessible song of his career that very night. And then he buried it near the end of his record. But when it was released as the lead-off single, it was the spark that started a fire, leading to the most hits from one album in history. The record would go on to sell 30 million copies. Get the story of the reluctant hitmaster coming up on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember the movie or TV tie-ins in book or comic book form back in the day, you're gonna dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the red button and click the bell so you always know when our latest and greatest come out. We also have a Patreon, you're gonna wanna check that out. We have more content there and that helps us keep it a daily channel. So it's time for another edition of my favorite show that we do on this channel, number one in our hearts. This is really the definitive episode of this show. This is a show that honors songs that were so unbelievably great, they should have been number one on the Billboard Hot 100. But for whatever reason, be it radio play, lack of marketing, label support, or just sheer stupidity, the song came up short. Today's episode is one that I willed, I prayed, I tried to push, even using the force, as a 9-year-old kid to number one. For a month, it sat at number 2 behind a couple of songs, including Prince, When Doves Cry on Casey's American Top 40. I listened every week. It didn't get there. It's Dancing in the Dark by one of my favorites, Bruce Springsteen. Even if we're just dancing in the dark. Let's not get lost in politics on this. Let's talk about the music here, right? Throughout the 70s, it seemed like Bruce Springsteen was writing hits for anybody but himself. In 1976, Man for Man's Earth Band reached number 1 with the Springsteen classic Blinded by the Light. Another runner in the night, blinded by the light. In 1978, Patti Smith got to number 13 with a song that Bruce co-wrote, Because of the Night. Later that year, the Pointer Sisters hit number 2 with Springsteen's Fire. Ooh, fire. There are so many others. During that time, Bruce's biggest bragging rights for himself was the number 23 hit Born to Run. Not bad, but it wasn't a commercial smash at that time. And yet, without a track record of chart dominance, I mean, Bruce Springsteen's legend just continued to grow. In time, Bruce's 4 70s LPs would collectively sell around 15 million at the time. And all this time, there was a commercial explosion that was bubbling up. The question is, would the boss ever unleash it? Bolstering Springsteen was his killer live performances. Concert tickets routinely sold out in disproportion to his record sales or his top 40 presence. Bruce could fill a 20,000-seat venue faster than artists who sold 5 times as many records as he did. By 1980, when Bruce completed his double-disc album, The River, he was being hailed as the greatest performer in rock. Incidentally, it was with The River that Bruce nailed down his first big hit single, Hungry Heart. That one reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Now, with the help of Hungry Heart, The River certified platinum in the U.S. in less than 2 months, and it would also be Bruce's first number 1 album on the Billboard Albums chart. Something he'd flirted with on Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town, but he had yet to achieve it. Even with a couple of successful records, the boss was still primarily reaching his inner circle of fans, while more or less remaining unknown to a majority of the pop masses. 1982's brilliant yet less accessible Nebraska would do little to change that, right? Singles Atlantic City and Open All Night, there were no shows on the Hot 100. They weren't meant to be hits. though the groundswell around Springsteen was enough to push Nebraska to number 3 on the U.S. charts. An acoustic album, he and his guitar, really. But Bruce's under-the-radar of mainstream days were very numbered, whether he wanted it or not. The stage was set for a massive commercial breakout with his next release, Born in the U.S.A. Bruce had already started to work on Born in the U.S.A. even before he finished Nebraska, as many of you know. For mega fans of the boss, of which I am one, I could spend hours talking about the Nebraska Born in the U.S.A. period and how the two albums are close in theme, and even some of the songs could have been on Nebraska and vice versa, and the electric Nebraska that exists, and on and on and on. But I'm going to keep it simple for today's story and focus on Dancing in the Dark. But let me know if you'd like me to go in depth later, because I'm a Springsteenaholic. In all, it would take years to finish Born in the USA, and the album would take a series of twists and turns. In total, Springsteen would write between 80 and 100 songs for consideration on Born in the USA. Somehow he trimmed those down to just 12 songs, relegating the extras to future B-sides, compilation albums, hopefully a future Tracks Part 2 release or an anniversary album around this. I've waited decades for that, as have many of you. Born in the USA was co-produced by Springsteen, John Landau, Little Steven Van Zandt, and Chuck Plotkin, and recorded in New York City with the E Street Band. Since the release of Born to Run back in '75, Bruce's songs have become increasingly skeptical of the status quo. And the themes on Born in the USA, they continued in that trajectory, tackling issues of disillusionment, working class struggles, personal tragedy, the destruction of the American dream, really, and sexual tension. There's a lot of themes there. But simultaneously, Born in the USA was also Bruce's most commercially accessible record to date. It featured a flurry of pop-influenced and synthesized tracks, but for its part, Born in the USA was released on June 4th, 1984. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It debuted at number 9 on the Billboard 200 albums chart. By July 7th, it was sitting at number 1. Stayed in the top 10 for 84 consecutive weeks and has spent almost 3 years on the chart. Took less than a year for Born in the USA to certify platinum ×6 in the US. And in time, it would go on to sell over 30 million copies worldwide, one of the biggest albums ever. Altogether, Born in the USA featured 7 top 10 singles. One of only 3 albums to accomplish that in the rock era. The other 2, Michael Jackson Thriller and Janet Jackson Rhythm Nation, 2 pop artists, mind you. This was Bruce Springsteen, a rock artist, that pulled this off. Amazing. I think it's the greatest blockbuster album. We'll talk about that. The hits were Cover Me. That one went to number 7. I have these memorized. The title track reached number 9. I'm on Fire went to number 6. Glory Days was a top 5 at number 5. I'm Going Down hit number 9, and My Hometown hit number 6. Of course, there was the irresistible track that kicked it all off and took Bruce as far as he would want to go into the pop direction. Today's featured song, Dancing in the Dark. So after 2 years of work, 100 songs written and demoed, and dozens of tracks recorded, mastered, Bruce Springsteen had finally finished Born in the USA. Or at least that's what he thought. In January of '84, just as Springsteen was getting ready for the mixing and mastering of the record, his manager, John Landau, he dropped a bomb on the boss. This album wasn't good enough yet. It needed more of a commercial touch. John demanded that Bruce write one more track immediately. Had to be an anthemic blockbuster hit single. According to journalist Dave Marsh in his book Glory Days, Bruce didn't take the news well at all. He was completely exhausted. He was ready for the record to be released, ready for mixing and mastering. And he had a right to feel this way. He spent years on the album, ever the perfectionist. He just felt it was ready. Like he does with every live performance since the very beginning, He'd given his all. He'd written 8 dozen songs. He had wrestled with the positives and negatives of art and commerce, and he wasn't even sure he wanted to embrace the mainstream. And after all that inner turmoil about this, all this hard work, and writing an album full of hit singles, he told John if he wanted another song, he could write it himself. In 1987, Bruce would say, "John had been bothering me to write a single," which is something he rarely does. But he did that day, and he wanted something direct. This seemed to be what he was hitting on me for at that time. I was angry. I'd written a lot of songs and was kind of fed up with the whole thing. We'd been making the record for a long time and I was bored with the whole situation, end of quote. And although Bruce was pissed over his manager's recommendation, he ultimately obliged. He went off to his hotel room and he wrote "Dancing in the Dark" that very night. And it was a surefire smash. "Dancing in the Dark" satisfied Landau's itch for a commercial hit, and then some, but it definitely left Springsteen fretting. I mean, it was the boss's most overt pop song yet, and in Springsteen's own words, he said, "It went as far in the direction of pop music as I ever wanted to go, and probably a little further." The last-minute addition, it was undeniably catchy. It was a rocker. Unlike any previous Springsteen tracks, "Dancing in the Dark" embraced modern technology, really. Riding the wave of a glossy, synthesized sound. Musically, it was unlike anything Bruce had ever put to record. But anyone who thinks that "Dancing in the Dark" is simply a happy dance song has definitely not taken the time to listen to the words. I mean, lyrically, the song is a story of straight-up desperation. It's about a guy trapped in a sad situation that he just can't get out of. He gets up in the evening, presumably to work the night shift. We're talking about Springsteen here. And he ain't got nothing to say. He comes home in the morning, he goes to bed feeling the same way. I go to bed feeling the same way. The man, not unlike Springsteen, is tired and bored with all of it. Later he says that he's just not getting anywhere. That he lives in a dump and that he's dying for some action. He knows that there's something better for him out there, and that something has got to give. Something has to give here. The man wants to change his clothes, his hair, his face. He needs a spark to ignite a fire within his life. And yet he's passive. He's getting older, and he's just waiting for something to happen. Now, as Springsteen sings, the joke, it's on him. On a literal level, you can read Bruce's state of mind into the lyrics of "Dancing in the Dark." Bored with a 2-year project and frustrated over having to write a hit single after writing really a slew of them. That all fits very well. But at the same time, the song still speaks to the rest of us. "Dancing in the Dark" is for anyone who's ever worked that dead-end 9-to-5 job, or even worse, has dragged themselves out of bed to pull another graveyard shift. It's about pouring your life into something that you don't care about, just to scrape by. All the while, the world seems to be passing you by. "Dancing in the Dark," it's about wanting things to change, but really feeling powerless to make those changes happen. Or at least that's one way to interpret it, right? Everybody has their take. You can't start a fire without a spark. And with every Springsteen song, he always gives you hope. The last line gives the best advice in the whole song. To stop being a victim and going out and taking what's yours. He says, you can't start a fire worrying about your little world falling apart. You got to go make it happen. But no matter what you think the song means, Bruce, he'd worked his butt off for writing it, and "Dancing in the Dark" was poised to become the most successful song of his career. Even if we're just dancing in the dark. Now, it was released as a single on May 9th, 1984. It'd actually be a couple of weeks before "Dancing in the Dark" entered the Billboard Hot 100. It started its climb at number 36 on May 26th, 1984. But just a month later, on June 30th, "Dancing in the Dark," it had climbed to number 2 for the first of 4 weeks at that spot. 4 weeks at number 2. And although "Dancing in the Dark" failed to reach the summit on the Billboard Hot 100, It is worth noting it did reach #1 on the Cashbox chart, also on the U.S. mainstream rock chart. He was stuck behind Duran Duran and Prince. Actually, Bruce would later say in the liner notes for his greatest hits album, "Damn the artist formerly known as Prince." That's back when he had that name. Dancing in the Dark also smashed it on the charts around the world, though. It broke into the top 5 pretty much everywhere. It reached #5 in Australia, #4 in the UK and South Africa, #3 in Canada, #2 in Sweden, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and Ireland, and it went to #1 in Belgium. And as a result, Dancing in the Dark propelled Springsteen to the somewhat unwanted status of a mainstream superstar, even pop star, if you can imagine that. But if Bruce was less than thrilled at that prospect, the iconic video for Dancing in the Dark, it did him in for good. It didn't do him any favors. This video was huge. It still is. If you don't remember it, you didn't live the 80s. Actually, though, the original concept, it was completely different. It had Springsteen literally dancing in the dark. It was shot against a black background. Jeff Stein was the director of that version, and Daniel Pearl, famous for his cinematography on Every Breath You Take, headed up photography. However, Pearl and Springsteen got in an argument over how the video would be shot, and Bruce walked out after a few takes, apparently. The dispute opened the way for a new shoot with director Brian De Palma. For this second attempt, Bruce opted for a performance clip. The video was shot at the St. Paul Civic Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. This happened on June 28th and 29th, 1984. Day 1 was strictly a video shoot. Day 2 was on the opening date of the Born in the U.S.A. tour. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band performed the song twice during that show so De Palma could get all the shots that he needed for the video. The Dancing in the Dark video famously concludes with Bruce handpicking future Friends actress Courtney Cox out of the audience to dance with him on stage. Everybody knows about this iconic moment. It was, of course, no coincidence. Cox, already a professional actress, had been planted there. Courtney Cox would later say that she was one of multiple girls that Bruce could have picked, and that she was secretly hoping that it would not be her. I guess she was pretty nervous about it. Describing the experience as really scary, she said that once on stage, she just tried to imitate Bruce's dance. Not sure that was the best idea. Springsteen clearly approved, or was a good actor himself, because you could see the smile on his face from the back of the stadium, really. And he still makes fun of his horrid dancing, or his Jersey James Brown dance moves, as he'd talk about in his autobiography. He also claims that his kids mock him about it from time to time. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air actor Alfonso Ribeiro. He would later say that he crafted his famed Carlton dance after Courtney's dancing in the video. If you look for it, I think you can see the likeness, which really is Springsteen's dance, because she was copying Springsteen. It's not unusual to be loved. The Dancing in the Dark video debuted on MTV on July 10, 1984, and was quickly put into heavy rotation, successfully introducing Bruce to a new and younger audience. Dancing in the Dark has appeared in several movies and TV shows throughout the years. Fame, the TV series Growing Pains, Muppets Tonight, Promised Land, Guapas, Maggie's Plan, Home Before Dark, The Mindy Project, and The Stranger. Even if we're just dancing in the dark. And then there was Saturday Night Live. In April of '95, while Courtney Cox was delivering her monologue, Adam Sandler crashed the stage as the boss to reenact the pair's Dancing in the Dark glory days. covers for Dancing in the Dark include renditions by Tina Turner, Man for Man's Earth Band, of course, John Legend, The Script, Taylor Swift. Panic at the Disco with Neon Trees, Kelly Clarkson, Coldplay, Sean Coleman, Fastball, Bob Dylan, Shawn Mendes, and so on and so forth. So what can you say about the impact of Born in the USA and Dancing in the Dark on Bruce's career that hasn't been said? The album and its lead single helped Springsteen achieve pop legend status. A reluctant superstar, he was now hovering pop stratosphere with Michael Jackson and Prince, later Madonna, top 4 there for sure. Bruce, of course, expressed reservations about the album and the fame that came with it. But for those of us who grew up with Born in the USA in the 80s, we wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, commercial or not, it's a legitimate contender for one of the most iconic records ever. It brought Bruce to the masses. It was one of the first albums that I bought with my own money, and it was one that I listened to with my dad all the time growing up. And now I do the same thing with my 15-year-old son. I know every song by heart. And I'll say in my own opinion, it's the greatest balance of art and commerce blockbuster album ever. I'd love to cover the album and more of its songs. If you'd be interested, let me know below. So let's close up shop by coming back to the #1 in our hearts designation. As I mentioned, Dancing in the Dark, it made a 4-week stand at #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. To be precise, 2 songs kept it from #1, Duran Duran's Reflex and Prince's When Doves Cry. The Reflex would spend 2 weeks at #1, and When Doves Cry held the top spot for 5 weeks, I believe. I think between the 2, we could sacrifice 1 week from either of those to crown Bruce Springsteen with his first #1 hit. After all, he's the only boss I answer to. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Bruce Springsteen and Dancing in the Dark. What are your memories of this song? Truly, this is my #1 designation for #1 in our hearts because it really deserved to be #1. Let's have a discussion about the album, about the time, 1984, the greatest year in pop culture history. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. Let's talk about this passion for music every day we do it. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth.